Hello, welcome to
everyone.
another Angular London online meetup. Hi Pete, hi Ashnita, thank you for joining us today.
Hi Josh, hi Ashnita.
Hello.
So this is now our fifth online Angular London meetup. We've really been enjoying them. Oh, and Ashnita has just dropped off. Hopefully she'll come back again.
You wanted to give us the stage to talk for a bit, Josh. That's what
exactly. Like always, we'd love to get more people up here and talking. So if you'd like to, please get in contact with us. We actually have a few lined up over the next few months, which we're quite excited about. And so you should keep an eye on the meetup page and the Twitter account to Vigesh, I think she's back again.
Yeah.
Hello, back again. That's the fun of online live streaming.
So sorry about that.
No worries. So keep an eye on our social channels, and we'll let you know when new meetups are going to be coming online. Also through the talk, don't forget to ask your questions in the comments below. And at the end, Ashnita will be doing some Q&A. And then also following straight after the stream, we'll be doing another Zoom to do some networking and some more chatting with Ashnita. Thank you very much. So Pete.
Yeah, so we're really pleased to have you with us this evening, Ashnita. Normally, Ashnita's busy running her own meetups in Reading, so we're very lucky to have her come and give us a talk today. I just wanted to say that we first met you in 2018, I think it was, when you came to Angular Connect to give a lightning talk, which was like a 5-minute, really short little rattle-off talk. And then at the last minute, one of our main speakers dropped out, and you very bravely volunteered to step up and convert your 5-minute talk to a full half an hour, I think it was. And that was fantastic. And you've just gone from strength to strength, and you've become a real regular on the conference circuit. So hopefully you can share some more of your insights with us this evening to do with preloading. I think it's an area that I'm always interested in, trying to speed up the startup for your apps, because that's like the key to getting your users to stay with you, isn't it? So whenever you're ready, you can get started. We'll step back and give you the floor.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Yeah, just before we get started, I just wanted to comment on your comment you made. So, yeah, I actually came to Angular Connect the very first time in 2017, and I don't know if you can see, but I'm wearing like the T-shirt from Angular Connect 2017, and the theme was space. Angular Connect always has these fun themes, and yeah, so it was such a brilliant experience coming to the conference as a newbie and meeting so many people. Got so inspired that, as Pete said, I wanted more of it. And so I thought, how can I be at Angular Connect again? And I applied to be a speaker and got accepted as the lightning talk. So it's just brilliant experience, and it's been a great relationship with the Angular London meetup since the conference. I came to join the GDG Reading group and became one of the organizers, and also became a Women Tech Maker ambassador. So Pete and Josh and the Angular London community has been really supportive, and for example, they funded the International Women's Day video expense for GDG Reading. So I'm so excited about what this sort of community and connection can give you, and how much people help each other. So yeah, I just wanted to use this opportunity to thank Angular London meetup in person, really. Yeah, so
Well, it's so kind of you, Ashnita.
Yeah,
We always wanted the meetup to be for the community and to help support
absolutely.
groups around. So if there are any sort of groups that would benefit from support from the Angular London meetup, then do get in touch with us, because we're really keen to make more connections and help out where we can.
Definitely.
Great. Okay, so I am ready to get started. So perhaps should we switch over to my screen now?
Yep.
And okay.
There we go.
All right, so now that I'm on here, I'm not actually able to see anybody. So if you can't hear me or see something, just perhaps let me know, Pete and Josh. So, all right, so I'll just get started now. So hello, everybody, and hello from Reading. And thank you for inviting me to the meetup tonight. I'm really excited to talk to you about the preloading routes, preloading routes in Angular for faster navigation. So, right, so it is a truth universally acknowledged that a successful site must have good user experience. How fast a site loads, how fast it navigates, and how fast it responds to the user interactions all play a big part in the user experience of the site. When we visit a site, it doesn't feel great when we have to wait for the content to load. Or when we click on a button or a link, which just doesn't seem to respond. In fact, it feels pretty stressful. We have to take deep breaths, calm ourselves, and meditate so we don't angrily start clicking or tapping on that button, which is not responsive. Of course, there are factors that affect the perceived speed, the load speed, and the perceived user interaction response. For example, when we are out and about, when we are on the move and in a rush, waiting for the page seems like an eternity. On the other hand, if we are at home and are relaxed, we tend not to mind or notice as much the wait time. But we can all agree that it is not fun to wait for a page. In fact, studies show that mobile users value the speed of the page load the most. So how fast should a site be? How fast should it load? And how can we measure these? What are the metrics to look for? A study by Google shows that 53% of the users, of the mobile users, will abandon a site if it takes more than 3 seconds to load. And I really like this tweet from Monica, who is a senior engineer at Google. She used to be on the Polymer project and now on Magenta. I think so. She says, if you wouldn't make eye contact with a stranger for the time it takes for your web page to first paint, it's too slow. We can use the Google's web, the Web Vitals to further quantify this. So the first contentful paint is the time from when the page starts loading to when the first text content or image is displayed on the screen. And the largest contentful paint is when the first, when the main content of the page is being rendered. Rendering the content really quickly is very important, because then the users can start engaging with the page rather than having to stare at a blank page. They can start being engaged with the page. It provides a good first impression and perceived performance. But for an interactive web application, what matters even more is being able to interact with the page quickly, with the application quickly. So it's important to look at the metrics that look at the time delay for, or for the responsiveness of how the page is doing for the user interaction. So time to interactive, let's look at that. So time to interactive is the time when the page is fully interactive. So the page is actually fully interactive when it can respond to a user interaction within 50 milliseconds. So the best practice for these metrics is to aim for less than a second for the first contentful paint, less than 2.5 seconds for largest contentful paint, and time for interactive to be less than 5 seconds. To just put it in perspective, in context, to see how these timings feel, 200 milliseconds feel quite instant. Less than a second feels like it is performing smoothly. Less than 5 seconds feels still part of the user flow. But if it is more than 8 seconds, then users will lose attention. It gives them a bad experience, and they're likely to abandon the site. So before we dive into talking about how we can use code splitting, lazy loading, preloading, etc., to make the page load fast, to make the navigation fast, I just think that it's important to have a little look at what are the factors that affect the load times. So we can keep these in mind when we build our strategies for preloading. So let's look at network latency first. So, okay, so this, I quite like this picture. It's from MDN. It looks a bit old school, but basically when we visit a site, there's a lot that goes behind the scenes. So the browser has to do has to change the domain into look up the IP address for the domain, and so it has to look it up either from cache, but if it's a first-time user, it'll contact the domain, query the domain name system to do the lookup. Then it will do a three-way handshake to set up a TCP connection with the server, and a further TLS negotiations to make sure that the connection is secure. Only then can it send a HTTP request for the web page, for the HTML and for the resources, and then it will wait for the server to respond with the HTML as the payload. Okay, so we do have an application can use service worker to make to cache some of the resources and to make the requests faster. So it can an application can have a nice setup for caching resources, so it doesn't have to always be fetching from the server, and also so this is not exactly the setup that all the infrastructures will have. You may be using a Jamstack where the pages are where the files are pre-rendered and then they're hosted on the on a CDN. But the main idea here still is that there is network latency from when the user first starts navigation, when the request for the resource is made, to when it will receive the resource. And the time can vary on slow networks. Another factor which is quite important is the devices that the users use. So user devices can vary quite a lot, from a fast, high-end device to slower, lower-end devices. And the data plans, the access to data that users have will also vary. Some users have unlimited data, others have a prepaid plan. So why should we even care about the mobile users? More and more people are accessing the internet using the web applications from the mobile. So it is quite important. And users may be on quite varying networks. So even though we have got faster to newer generation networks like 4G and 5G even now, there are quite a lot of users who still are on 2G, 3G, or even 2G. So it is quite important that we care about and we test on slower networks. Okay, and another factor is that the main thread, which does quite a lot of work. So it's the browser's renderer process which is responsible for turning our pages, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript into the web page that we can see and we can interact with. But most of the work is actually done on the main thread. So when the browser receives the HTML, it will parse it and create the document object model, the DOM. It will pass the styles and create the CSS object model. It will combine the visible content from the DOM and with the computed styles into a render tree. And then in the layout phase, it will add the position and the size of the actual elements where they sit on the viewport. And then it will paint it, and there might be elements that are expected to change quite a lot, like video or canvas, or elements with properties like will change or with 3D transforms. So the browser will decide to put them into separate layers. So a compositing stage is necessary to make sure that the layers are printed in the right order. So, but I mean, the browser is very efficient at doing this. But that's not the only thing it does. The main thread also does process and execute the JavaScript. So it downloads it, parses it, compiles it, and executes it. So there is a bit of cost to JavaScript. It's a little bit more involved in downloading a JavaScript file, for example, as compared to an image file. And while the main thread is busy rendering or processing the JavaScript, it's not able to respond to the user events. That's the main thread also is responsible for responding to the user events. So it's quite important to not tie up the main thread. A task that is going to take more than 50 milliseconds is called long task in Chrome DevTools. You can see that. And from this, we can start seeing that JavaScript can benefit from being into smaller chunks, so they can be processed quicker. So what can we do in terms of making the page load faster? And at this stage, the initial page load faster. We are not, the factors like network latency and the user devices, etc., is not in our control. But as web developers, we do have control over the JavaScript that we include, that we load. So what we can do is we can use code splitting to reduce the JavaScript payload. So instead of sending the whole application, we can split it into smaller chunks and then only send what the initial page needs. And then, okay, so sorry. Okay, so let's have a look at what Angular actually ships and what we have in our bundles. So we've got, I mean, we're quite familiar with this, but just for the sort of interest of anyone who is new to Angular, we've got the runtime JS, styles, the polyfills, and the main JS. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the style will, in the production, will be loaded as a link rather than a JavaScript. But anyway, so the main JS, at this stage, it has got all the application code in it. It's got everything. So whether the user needs everything, whether they want to visit all the different links and routes, the main JS just includes everything. But with code splitting, we can take out all the different routes. We can use route level code splitting actually in Angular. So that allows us to split the individual routes, the modules, into separate bundles. And now the main JS will only have whatever is necessary for when we first load the page for the home page, really. And then everything else, all the different routes, can be lazy loaded. They can be loaded when we need them. So by default, the Angular router basically it only loads the route modules if the user navigates to the route. So when the user navigates to the route. So it's like this feeling of feeling quite nice when we just don't have to do something just yet. So when the user comes and visits the site, we'll load it then. And it is the Angular CLI makes it really easy to set up lazy loading. So we simply, all we have to do is do the use the command ng generate module, and then the name of the module, the path, and the parent module. And then we will have the routes configured for us. The CLI does that for us. So it is, I think, I mean, this is not new to a new thing in Angular, but I think it does help us to sort of understand or have a little closer look at what's happening here. So the LoadChildren is where we configure the lazy loading. So, or where the lazy loading is configured. So it basically has a function which then uses the ES6 dynamic import, which returns a promise. So unlike static imports, a dynamic import lets us specify like an expression for the name for the module specifier, and also it lets us import this module on demand, like conditionally based on code. So here with the lazy loading, it's just gonna, when the route, when the user visits the route, then the router will just load it for us, and there's no conditions been applied at this moment. So now we have lazy loading set up, and when the user visits the site, the browser or the router will download the initial bundles, which now the main bundle is pretty small, and it's hopefully optimized code, so it loads quickly and it executes quickly, and then the main root app is rendered really quickly. So we have we are all good for all the metrics on first content for paint, largest content for paint, and time to interactive. And so the user's pretty happy because they could start using they could see our content and start using our site quickly. But is that all now? The initial page load, is that all that's important? It's not. So we also have to take care of the rest of the user's experience on our site to make sure that the navigation is smooth as well. So here's a problem with stopping at lazy loading only. So whenever the user visits a route now, with a feature, they have to again wait while the router downloads the bundle for that route. So each time they visit a route, they have to wait. So all the things we mentioned about user experience earlier, it's now, I mean, it matters here too. So the user would end up having a bad experience, especially on a slower network. I mean, it's everything's much quicker, perhaps not even noticeable on a faster network, but we even on a faster network, we don't always. There are many factors that can affect the network speed. So we may experience slow networks, even if you have fast one. So what can we do to make things faster, really? So we can use preloading, which basically is, now we've got the bundles, the route modules, and we've got the route configuration set up. We want to be able to load these bundles even before the user asks for it, in anticipation for when they need it. So in Angular, we have kind of three strategies, let's say. So no preloading, which is the default. So by default, there is no preloading, and everything is lazy loaded when the users navigate to a route. And then we have preload all modules, which preloads everything after the user has visited the initial page and the navigation ends. It will basically preload all the modules, or we can set up custom strategy. So yeah, so preload all, basically, it is very easy to set up because this is built into Angular. So to start using preload all modules, all we have to do is to configure the route. So as a second parameter in the route module for route, we can specify preloading strategy and say preload all modules. So very simple. But there are problems with preloading all the modules, as you can imagine. So if we have a large application with lots of modules, 20, let's say, and the user might only want to be visiting 2 features, so they will end up preloading a lot of things that they didn't need, they didn't ask for, tying up the network and processing. And if the user is actually on a data save plan or a preplay plan, so it's costing them in data for things that they are not going to use. So this is, I mean, it's completely fine for if you have a small application and just a couple of routes which will be used and you just want to preload them. But for the case when you need more control over the preloading, we can create custom strategies. So I have got like a few examples through seeing what others have done and what's out there for the strategies that we can use, examples of strategies that we can use for preloading. So we can use selected routes, or like if we know that these through maybe our own analytics or just through experience that these are the popular routes, we can preload them. We can use mouse over or mouse down as the intention on a link on a route to mean as the intention of to visit this and then already preload it, as there is a little delay over from when the user hovers on something and when the actual the click the mouse up happens. So there is a little time you can save already. We can do preloading based on network information, and there are a couple of libraries. So we will have a look at these in a bit more detail. Before going into seeing the code for how we build custom strategies, let's just talk over just the basic steps. So it is quite simple, really, to create custom preloading in Angular. As with a lot of things, we would build a service, and the service would implement the preloading strategy interface that's provided by Angular, which basically means that we implement a preload method. And then we would basically configure the router with the custom strategy. Okay, so yeah, so this is what we saw earlier. So this is how we configure the router and pass in this second parameter, which is the options parameter, and say the preloading strategy and the name of the service. And this is the preloading strategy interface that I talked about. It's a class that basically has a single method called preload. The preload method has two parameters. The first is the route configuration. And then the second is a function which is like a load function, which the router will execute to actually load to do the loading. And in this preloading, in this preload method is where we can implement the logic for selecting the route that we want to preload. Okay, so I did have a go at trying to explain, trying to show how the preloading works in a diagram form. So hopefully it's helpful and not confusing. So let's see. So when the so a user visits the page, visits the site, and when the navigation ends, the router will emit a navigation end event. And so the preloading, once the navigation ends, the router will then check through the route configuration to see what routes are being lazy loaded, the ones that have got LoadChildren property, and they don't, and the routes that do not, the lazy loaded routes that do not have a can load guard on it. So if a route has a can load guard on it, the router won't preload it as for example, if we try and preload something in the background while you're on a page currently, then if the guard fails, it may redirect the user to another page, and it is confusing. So to use a guard for your route, it's better to use can activate then. Okay, so if so those lazy loaded routes that can be preloaded the router will run the preloading, the preload method specified in the preloading strategy that we registered to decide if it should preload this route or not. And then so this is all happening while the user is still on a particular page. And then when they go to visit the route that has been preloaded, it's the navigation to it will be super quick because it's been downloaded and processed. The JavaScript has been downloaded and processed already, and so all that has to happen is to execute and render the JavaScript, execute the JavaScript and render the component. So okay, so to go back to the strategies now, we can use, so the first strategy that I mentioned was to use a preload selected module. So again, I mean, we can name and think of good names to give the strategy. So it's a name that I've just kind of selected. So preload selected modules, which here the idea is basically that in the route configuration has got a data property. So we can use this data property to say that we want to preload a route. Yes, so we can specify in there preload and true or false. We will have a look at code in a bit, but to sort of avoid switching back and forth between the slides and the demos, I'm just going to do a run through of this of the slides, and then we will switch to demos. So, okay, the second strategy that I mentioned was about using basically like taking the mouse over as the intention to visit a route. So we can then, if the user hovers on a link, then preload that. And the third strategy is to use the network information that's provided to us in the browser API called a navigator connection. So this is a really handy, super great API. So basically, it figures out the effective type of the network, whether it's a 2G, 3G, or 4G connection, based on the round trip of the current connection. So the round trip time of the current connection, it chooses that to decide which type of connection it is. And we can use this in our code to decide if somebody's on a slower network, or if they have the save data, if they have the data usage mode set. So we don't want to be preloading things that when people want to save the data. And then the last two strategies that I wanted to mention were, one is Quicklink. So this is a JavaScript library, I think created by Eddie Osmani in collaboration with perhaps a few others. And then there is a Angular sort of Angular package called NGXQuicklink, which is created by Minko. And the NGXQuicklink and Quicklink in general, basically it uses the intersection observer web API to detect the intersection observer API lets us observe if an element is within a parent element or in the view. So whether there is an intersection. So it's a very efficient way to see if something is in our view port. And the NGXQuicklink also uses request idle callback to see if the browser is actually idle, and it will only do the preloading if it is. It uses the navigator connection and only preloads if the user has a fast connection. And it sets up the preloading strategy for us in Angular. So basically, I think I forgot to mention what the Quicklink does actually. So it basically sees what links are in the view at the moment, so in the viewport at the moment, and then it will preload all those that are currently in the viewport based on these criteria. And to set it up is really quite simple. We just have to install the NGXQuicklink. And then, like with all the preloading strategies, we have to configure the router to use preloading strategy. And in this case, it's Quicklink strategy. And we have to, in addition, we have to import the Quicklink module into a shared module, import and export the Quicklink module, and then import the shared module into the app module and any lazy loader modules where we want to use Quicklink. Yeah. Okay. So the last strategy is Guest.js, and Guest.js is a library that is built by Minko Gerchev in collaboration with a few other people. And basically, it is a data-driven, data-driven sort of model. So at build time, the Guest.js takes data from the analytics, for example, Google Analytics, and then it builds a machine learning model, a probability model. And it has got a very small runtime, which it ships with the main JS. And so when basically when the route changes, when the user visits a route, the runtime will check with the probability model to decide which route is which route based on data, based on the model, that the user is most likely to visit next from the current route. And it uses, so instead of using the sort of LoadChildren setup that we have and the ES6 import, dynamic import that we use for lazy loading and the other preloading so far, Guest.js uses a browser feature, a web standard called prefetch. So it basically is a hint to the browser to prefetch the resources because they will be needed. Because they will be needed next, and the browser will cache these resources. It'll download it, processes it, and cache it. Just won't execute it yet. So if you are, this talk is not about the prefetching that we can use with the browser standards, but when doing the research on this topic, I found it on preloading and prefetching resources, I found it really fascinating. There's a lot you can do. So if you are interested to have a look in your own time, if you're not familiar with it already, there are quite a few browser standards that you can look up. So, okay, and then in terms of setup for Guest.js, there is a little bit involved, and of course you need to have Google Analytics, but there isn't too much to set up, and Minko explains it really well, quite great, sort of with examples and in his documents. So I just give you a link to that. It's HTTPS Guest.js GitHub.io docs Angular, and you can have a look at the steps to set it up. So now we've been talking quite a bit about the strategies. Let's switch over to having a look at the demos where we could see the code and see an application trying to use preloading strategies. So let me switch over to that. So first of all, I'll just quickly show the demo that I'm going to use. It's very, very simple, just so that I can, it can fit on the screen as well, and we can look in the dev tools easily. So basically, I have some routes, home, docs, resources, and in the resources page, there is a further route for community. And then I've got some sort of hidden away routes to features as well. So this is the application that we'll try and see being used with preloading. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at setting up the code for setting up these selected modules. So this is okay. So we have a service, and it just sits in the main app because it's going to be used by everything. So it's a service. It's provided in root, and it implements the preloading strategy, and has got a preload method. And the preload method has got the route configuration and a load function, and which returns an observable. So in this very simple strategy, we simply say if the route has a data property and it has a preload, if it has a true thief or preload property, like preload true, then load this route, otherwise it won't. And basically then, so if we have a look at our routing module, I have set up the data. So I've set up for the docs route and the resources routes to be preloaded. And by simply not including it in the other ones, they're not going to be preloaded. Okay, and then it's as simple as just configuring the router with, so preload all. Okay. Okay, let me open the network tab to see. Okay, and just refresh it. So as you see, it's once the navigation completed on the home page, then all these modules got preloaded, and there are quite a few already. And oops. Actually, but that's not what I wanted, was it? Oh, right, no, sorry. I am not in coding mode just right at this moment. So I don't want to preload all, but you've now seen the demo for preload all. What I do want to do is preload selected modules. So, and you see how easy it is to just simply switch to a new strategy if you wanted to change it. So now I've switched to preload selected modules. And then you see that only docs and resources have been preloaded now. Okay. Let's have a look at the other strategy about network information. So here we again have a service. It's called Fast Network Preload Strategy. And in the preload function, I just basically check to see if the navigator connection exists. There is great browser support for the navigator API. And then I have got in an array just the networks that I consider are slow, and we don't want to preload these. So basically, the code is quite simple to check if the connection exists. If the user has got the save data on, we don't want to preload this. We just return off null. And then check to see if the effective type is in one of the, whether it's in the slow connections, and if it is, we don't want to preload the routes. And if it is, then we just return the load function. And the router will call this load function when it goes through, when it finishes the navigation, it will call this load function, and then if it was in fact not a slow route network, it will then just go to, it will call this function here, which is set up in the LoadChildren, and use the ES6 import, dynamic import with the module setup that we've configured in the router. So let's try and use that strategy. So I'm just going to copy the fast network preload strategy and change the route configuration to now use that one. And then, so at this moment, it just looks like as if everything's preloaded, because the only condition there is to check if it is a slow network or a save data mode is turned on. I cannot simulate, or at least I don't know how to do a save data setting on the DevTools, but I can throttle the network to simulate a slow network. So if I go to fast 3G, I think it should work, and do a refresh, then I should see that now none of the routes have been preloaded because I'm on a slower network. And so if we switch over to the console quickly and see navigator connection, and it's a network information, where you can see that now my effective type is 3G. So it's just really very handy to have this API. Okay, let me switch back to online. And I think in terms of just being wary of the time now, in terms of doing demos, I will show the quick link as well, because I think it's really quite cool. So all I have to do is switch this, and in my shared mode, I can show you quickly that in my shared module, I have got Quicklink module just imported and exported. And then, for example, if I go to one of the feature modules, there actually, lazy loading module. Oh, okay, never mind. I forgot what I needed to show. But anyway, so you see, it's been imported and exported in the shared module, and then app module. Okay, so I imported in the app module. Okay, so let's have a quick look at that in action. Okay, so what I expect to see is that those links that are visible in the viewport at the moment, so that should be docs and resources, the modules for these routes have been preloaded. So you can see that in our list of files in the network, they have been preloaded. And then if we okay, so if we visit, if we click on the menu that exposes all these feature routes, we see that that's preloaded all the feature routes already, because now those links, those are visible in our viewport. So to show a little difference now to that, so if I now go to, so I've just made the screen size quite small, and then when I clicked on the menu to expose the feature routes, the feature A, B, and C, you can see that it's only preloaded feature A and B. And now if I scroll down, it has now, when feature C, the link to feature C route is visible in the viewport, it then preloaded the module for that route as well. So I think it's sort of like a good way to not over prefetch, over preload. And also we can see that if we have a slower network, then it would not preload anything. Ooh. Actually, maybe it has to be a slow 3G. Okay, so now we have a slow 3G network, and I was on home and docs already. Okay, so bear with me to try that just one more time. So now I'm on the home page, and on a slow 3G network, and using the Quicklink strategy, I now should not have any of the routes preloaded because the network is too slow. Okay, so right, so as the final demo, I want to switch over to the Guest.js one quickly. So with the Guest.js, it's a little different. So I'm not serving this locally. I have already built, done an ng build, and then generated the dist folder. I can show you. So I've built the application, and so I would serve that, and just want to show you this sort of data that's going to be used for the routing. So this obviously is not based on analytics. I have got a hard-coded routes JSON, which when you have a proper website with analytics, you would have this information generated by the Guest plugin. So for our little demo, I've just got this hard-coded JSON file, which this is, but it's a good, it gives you an idea of what you will see. So if from the home page, the main route, the chances of a user visiting the docs route is 80%, and to visit the resources is 20%. And so when they are on docs, for example, the chances of visiting the resources is 80%. So I suppose you could say that these two are quite popular. And then for example, from the community route, the chances of visiting the homepage or the resources is 33%, and the docs is 34%. So, okay. So the test I can do, like the demo I can do, is see if I go to the resources route, it should then preload the community module. Okay, so let's have a look. And I have already, I'm running, serving it already from the dist folder. So it's on port 5000. So I'll just switch to that. So here, okay, let me start from the beginning. Okay, so this is Guess.js doing the preloading now. And as we saw in that routes JSON, the docs and resources look like they were the most likely pages to visit next from the home page. So we have got so the Guest.js has preloaded docs and resource modules. If we see in this tab, in this column here for size, it's a little different from what we were seeing in our locally served one, where now you can see that it's actually prefetch cache that's coming from, whereas in our for example, in Quicklink, if I just quickly show you that, the initiator, so it's coming from the LoadChildren here, and we don't see the pre-cache here, whereas for Guest.js, you can see that it's prefetch cache. So that's because it's using the link tag from the browser to do the prefetching. Okay, so the demo we wanted to do was if we go to resources, it's preloaded the community one, because based on the data, that's where the user is expected to visit next. And when we go to community, it'll be rather quick. So that's basically all the demos done now, and pretty much all of my presentation. So let me go back to my slides just so that I can wrap up. Okay. I'm not sure why it's taking a while. So I think let me just sort of wrap up without going back to the slides at this moment. So the preloading strategy that you use very much depends on what your need is. And here I have shown you examples of some of the things that we can at least take care of, like the network connection and uses data save mode. And there are really great libraries like the Quicklink and Guest.js that we can use if we don't want to set up a if we don't have a specific criteria for our own setup, we can make use of these libraries. And to set up your own custom strategy to write code for that, it's really quite simple with Angular, where we just simply implement the strategy in the one preload method and provide and register that service with the router, and that's all really. So okay, so that is all for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ashnita. That was really interesting.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Ashnita. I hadn't actually really thought about the different strategies you could have, because the classic ones are the preload everything and don't preload anything. And I never got my head around some of the more cool approaches. So it was really great to see those.
Yeah, the Guest.js one I think is really interesting. It's really interesting to see how it works as well.
Yeah, there are. I mean, there's really great talk from Minko about Guest.js, where he really explains how it works. I think there are some of the talks where he goes a bit more into perhaps the machine learning model, but and also really great talk from that I found a bit after I started preparing my talk from John Papa, who talked about custom strategies at NGConf, and he's implemented the mouse over, and I think his code is much nicer, so I didn't show my one. But
it's all very subjective, don't worry.
Yeah.
So we do have a few questions.
Okay.
Let me bring one up from Matthew first.
Sorry.
So Matthew asks, most of my Angular applications are in Chrome extensions and Electron. Would we expect to see any benefit ignoring memory by doing dynamic loading when all the assets are local?
I must say I don't really have much experience with not traditional web applications, so I don't know. What do you guys think?
I would assume that if it's all local, then there's probably not much of a difference, but I'm assuming there are extensions, especially in Electron as well, which do use some non-local things, which would then definitely benefit from it. So if you've got some kind of hybrid, I'm assuming it would help. But if everything's local, I'm assuming I don't know either.
Yeah, I asked them Matthew the question on the chat, because I didn't know either. So I think that they these Chrome extensions can be all set up in lots of different ways. So you can actually just, when you install them, download all of the assets that they'll need, or you can actually make network connections. So I assume that if you don't want to push stuff onto the browser when you install the actual extension, then you might still be able to use routing,
or make it a bit more dynamic, so that you don't have everything statically loaded into the extension. But if you wanted to be a bit more dynamic and able to push new updates or things, you could pull in extra information, maybe. So Pete always has a question. Let's see Pete's question. So can lazy loaded routes or routes have their own preloading strategy, or can it only be configured at the root?
good question.
This is something I didn't know. It just suddenly occurred to me that maybe, like, as you're navigating around, some parts of the
Yeah.
app might benefit from a different strategy.
Yeah.
And I've only ever seen it configured at the root level.
Yeah, I would be just contemplating trying to answer this. Like, this is something I would actually, like, straight after I'll go and see what happens if we try and do that. But in terms of just trying to sort of think through the theory of it, so it's the route configuration that the router goes through. So I'm guessing that if something has got a lazy loader, like with LoadChildren, then when the preload method gets the route, so if it actually arrives into the preload, if it's able to get there, then the router will be able to preload it. So yeah, whether when the preloader actually goes through the configuration, whether it passes in the children as well or not. Yeah, I don't really know for sure. My guess would be yes, but I don't know if it's true.
Exercise for the reader afterwards.
Exactly. So you had another question here. If your preloading routing is load component and template, component having service call. Oh no, sorry. Let me try.
So I had a quick chat with Srinivatan about this. So I think what he was talking about was like how are services involved in the lazy loading? Like, are they loaded at the same time? Can you preload those? That kind of thing.
Right. So I'm guessing you mean like the preload, the services where you define the preload strategy? Is that?
I think it's about what you're preloading. So you've got a route with a template and a service, right? So when you preload it, do they both come together, or is there ability to separate?
Yeah. So I think
with the actual template.
Yeah. So I mean, it's the whole module that gets bundled and preloaded. So I think at this moment, Angular just kind of like the mainstream code splitting is through the route code splitting, isn't it? So if whatever is in the module bundle will all get preloaded. So if you want to selectively just have some components or some services within this module, I think there is this, and I haven't explored it myself, but sort of a component level code splitting, but I don't quite know how that would work for services which kind of like provided in root or on the component. So it's an area I didn't really experiment with code component level code splitting. So sorry.
That's cool.
I think it's probably true that because as you said, you load the whole module when it's a lazy loaded route. So if you define a service in that module, then that will get only loaded when you preload that thing.
Right.
But you won't be able to access it, I guess, from outside of that route.
Yeah, so that's the things that are isolated within the module will have to be quite standalone. Like, the dependencies from outside, you wouldn't want to put things that are needed, elsewhere into a module that gets loaded lazily, I would say.
So I had a question more generally, which I think is interesting about the whole discussion around code splitting and where that level is about when it's more efficient to actually do a larger bundle versus splitting it up into really small bundles. And do you know where that line is, where it starts getting really sort of a bit ridiculous to split it up into those small bits versus making it too big to start with?
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of like the way that I would approach is more just like in terms of performance and the initial page load, they should really only have what is really necessary straight away. And so therefore that initial load, initial page should really be as small as you can have it, like only what's necessary. And then in terms of splitting all the different routes, whether to make it lots of modules, lots of smaller modules, I don't quite have the sort of literature on the guideline for where that is, but I think the way to approach it would be more to concentrate on optimizing the JavaScript code that's there. It's not just the size that matters. It's like if it's unoptimized code, it'll execute and take a long time as well. So perhaps like rather than thinking of what are the right sort of sizes to have, obviously if the file is quite large, and I think we can use our own sort of performance, how do you say, like investigation. We can watch our and see what the Lighthouse and all these profiling gives us. So if the JavaScript is quite large, which is the question mark, which is what is quite large, then it's going to take long to download and to parse and process it in general. And then the other side of that, the coin of the JavaScript, is that if it's not optimized, it's going to take long to run. So I think the biggest save is on that side, to make sure it's optimized code. And then you can see on if the JavaScript is a long task in the Google DevTools, if it's been labeled as long task, that's an indication that it's too big or too long in terms of how long it's. So you can definitely flag the JavaScript file which is of concern, and from there sort of see if it should be optimized in terms of execution time or reduced. But I mean, it's a great question, and I would like to research it and find out more. But at this stage, that's what I think.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I think that
also
really
some people were asking if they could have access to the code that you were demoing. Is that available on GitHub?
Oh yes, it is. So it is on GitHub. I think I couldn't finish my slides for some reason, but it's I will share my slides, and it's at the end with the resources.
Oh,
cool. So where I've got my code, and I'll put a link to John Papa's talk and Minko's resources as well. But my code is on GitHub.
Cool.
I'll share the slide, and you'll have the link.
We can add it to the meetup
on Twitter and also in the comments after the talk as well.
Yep.
So I think that's all we have time for in terms of Q&A for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashnita.
Really interesting talk.
Thank you.
It's giving us some stuff to go and play with.
Yeah, definitely. So we are going to do a Zoom call straight after this stream. The details are on the screen now, and we'll have a little networking and chat opportunity to carry on the conversation. So thank you very much for joining us again.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
You enjoyed it.
Yeah,
and
thank you everyone for listening to me.
It was great, and we look forward to having you on another time again soon. And we'll see everyone in the Zoom in a few minutes.
Yep. Bye, everyone.